In the event of a cardiac emergency, prompt action is crucial to maintain brain oxygenation until professional assistance can restore heart rhythm. Similarly, controlling hemorrhage takes priority over treating a bone fracture. As I sat on the patio feeling disoriented, I realized I had been in a blind spot. As a critical care nurse, I had honed my observational skills, enabling me to swiftly intervene and often prevent critical patient events. Yet, I had failed to recognize the warning signs of the impending collapse of my nearly 18-year marriage. I initially had no desire to salvage it, intending to end it decisively. However, reconsidered, I did not want to inflict pain on innocent parties by targeting my cheating wife and her lover. Sipping my beer, I weighed my options. Looking around my backyard, I saw the lawn stretching from the patio to the bayou, with only a few trees breaking the expanse. My traditional-style house, adorned with modern amenities, was a gift from my father and grandfather when I got engaged. The land had been in our family for generations, and the house had been constructed by our own construction company. Despite my father's initial disappointment, I had chosen nursing over joining the family business. My income allowed for certain luxuries, including a boat and fishing gear, and I made an effort to take my family on vacations when possible. Family was my utmost priority, and their well-being was now in jeopardy. Gazing around, my sister's identical house caught my eye. I called her over, feeling the need to talk. "Isn't it early for a drink, Rob?" "It's only 2 p.m., she remarked, noticing my beer. "I'm off for the weekend," I replied, and in the mood. She was aware of my work schedule, which often allowed for significant time off. I kept a cooler of beer nearby to avoid frequent trips to the fridge. Offering her a drink, she sat down. "What's so urgent?" Susan inquired. "I told you not to call anyone before talking to me. I've discovered Bonnie is cheating on me." My voice trembled. "Are you certain?" "Maybe it's just a cruel joke," she suggested. I shook my head. There was a video attached. No mistaking who sent it. "I don't know who did," I told her. The email simply stated that I should know and provided the evidence. The sender was clearly angry. Susan was incensed. "That lying cow? Doesn't she realize you'll destroy her and her lover? Do you know who the guy is?" I nodded in response, but she cut me off before I could speak. "If Rich ever cheated on me, I'd ruin his life. How does Bonnie even find the time to have an affair? She's home almost every night except for those bachelorette parties I always attend. She works with Rich and they usually drive together. Rich would notice if she was behaving abnormally." Susan paused, her expression changing as she noticed my shocked reaction. "No way," she gasped. "She's cheating with my husband. They're cheating on us with each other." Her face flushed and tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you gently," I said, embracing her. "I've had a couple of hours to process it enough to avoid grabbing a weapon." She cried briefly, then composed herself. "Okay, what do we do?" "Just wait for them and confront them?" Susan asked. "I love him, but I can't tolerate this. We need to be strategic," I replied. "Act normal tonight like nothing has happened." "We'll greet them with a kiss," Susan frowned. "Are you serious?" "We need a plan. We should seek legal advice tomorrow. At least we can rule out any STDs, I added with a smirk to lighten the mood. Susan pointed at me. "Hell no, that never even crossed my mind. You know me. I might joke about becoming a TV star, but I'd never actually do it." She finished her beer and tossed the can. I handed her another one. "Just for the record, I'm not having an affair with Rich. I just got my period." She laughed. "This will go on until we confront the cheaters. Rich isn't getting anything from me." "Bonnie can have him. And we must keep this from the kids for now," I cautioned. They had left for their grandparents' place that morning. They had not argued or questioned anything, simply entered Jason's car and driven off. Jason was 17, Rob 16, Dave and Cindy 16, and my daughter Deary 16. They had spent the entire summer together, more like siblings than cousins, especially during the pandemic when they were constantly in each other's company. Rich had been an involved father and uncle, always present in the kids' education and activities. I handled the outdoor fun, teaching them camping, fishing, and hunting. We'd camp in the backyard at first, then gradually ventured deeper into the swamp as they grew older. On our fishing trips, they'd often join me, sometimes with Rich or Susan driving the second boat. Recently, Rich had allowed his sons to skipper his boat while he stayed home. The kids were taught self-reliance, learning to find food on our trips, and working together as a team. They were resilient and placed great value on family and teamwork. 3 weeks earlier, I had rearranged my work schedule to get 6 consecutive days off. I took the girls in one boat and the boys in another. We traveled slowly to avoid snags and shallow water, stopping occasionally for everyone to take turns driving. We spent a week at the old Poe fish camp, fishing and crabbing. It was a time for us to connect as a family. Or so I had thought. Evidently, Bonnie and Rich did not share my value for family unity. The thought of informing the kids about their affair was heart-wrenching. Family meant everything to me, and fracturing that unity would be unforgivable. I conveyed this to Susan. "We can't hide it from them indefinitely," she said, "but we can delay it somewhat. I'll make sure they remain oblivious to any problems." What do we do next? "I can't forgive or condone infidelity, no matter what Bonnie says," I stated. Susan agreed. "I can tolerate a lot, but not cheating. I need to determine how to remove her from my life without losing everything. I won't risk going to jail or allowing her to gain an advantage over me. Let's take the kids and leave," I said. "I can't hurt Rich either. I have to be there for the kids." I cracked open another beer. "I get it. We need to break him financially. I'm going to take every penny I can get in child support, alimony, everything." I agreed that Rich earned more, so Susan had a better chance of securing a favorable financial settlement. Bonnie, on the other hand, could potentially send me to prison, as courts often favor women in divorce cases. I worked with trusts and wills in my job, but I knew enough about the law to understand that our assets were protected. "Susan, our houses are safe," I explained. "Dad gave them to us before we married, so Bonnie and Rich can't claim them. Bonnie might try to stay in your house until the kids are grown, but she can't claim it as her own. Didn't you and Bonnie sign a prenuptial agreement?" Dad insisted on it. It states that if either party cheats, they'll only get 20% of joint assets and no alimony. Yes, and Bonnie's father, a wealthy plastic surgeon, insisted on the prenup. He wasn't thrilled when I got his daughter pregnant, fearing I'd take half his fortune. My father also made Susan and Rich sign a similar agreement. "I'm worried about that video of Rich and Bonnie," Susan said. "Who filmed it and how?" "There were at least 3 cameras," I replied. The video I received shows the same event from different angles, suggesting it wasn't edited. Yet neither Rich nor Bonnie seemed aware they were being recorded. Susan insisted that I show her the video on my tablet. "Holy crap!" she exclaimed. Rich and Bonnie's comments in the video about how clueless Susan and I were enraged her. "Rich is done for," she declared. "But we need to find out who made the video. I don't want it coming back to haunt us." "I don't care if the world sees it as long as it doesn't affect us," I agreed. We decided to hold off on a public reaction for the time being. Susan sat silently, contemplating our next steps. Then she began to sob. I hugged her, and we both cried, unable to hide our pain any longer. That night, I met Bonnie at the door, hugging and kissing her as usual. I half expected her to pull away, but she kissed me back. I couldn't detect any trace of aftershave, just her perfume. Despite my anger, I told her dinner was ready. Susan and I had already planned takeout, neither of us wanting to cook. We joked about poisoning our spouses, but it was just a way to vent our frustrations, not a real option. The next morning, I watched Bonnie get into Rich's car. I called Susan. "How did it go?" "No problem," she replied, joking and planning. "Help me keep my cool. Any idea where they're going tonight?" Susan, always a bit of a loose cannon, needed to vent. We had to be honest about our feelings. At 10 a.m., we were in the office of one of Susan's bosses, Jake, a divorce attorney and an old friend. He agreed to represent us. "Are you sure you have a video showing both parties?" he asked. We assured him we did, but chose not to show it yet. "As long as you have evidence of infidelity, you're good," he said. "Your prenuptial agreements are strict." "Rob, did you consult a lawyer before signing?" I explained that my father had insisted on a legal opinion, and Susan had used the same document. Jake continued. "The cheater only gets 20% of joint assets, including savings and investments. There are no provisions for personal income accounts. Do either of you have any hidden income?" We shook our heads. "What if Bonnie has money she didn't tell me about?" I asked. "Common property," Jake replied. "Like if you bought something without telling her." Home improvements can be tricky. Your homes are protected because they were gifted before marriage, but things like solar panels might be considered common property. "So she only gets 20% because she's a cheater, right?" I asked. I'm willing to give her that. We can negotiate the division of furniture and other items. She'll have to pay for transportation and storage if she wants to take anything. Jake grinned. These are the games we'll play. The important thing is your ironclad prenups. As long as you prove infidelity, keep the video copies hidden and confidential. If they sue over the video being public, it depends on how it was obtained. Be careful, he emphasized the need for discretion. Susan and I nodded. We had considered editing the video and sharing it with our friends and family, but we were worried about the impact on our children. Now, we were more determined than ever to find out who had filmed it. We decided to serve the divorce papers on Thursday at noon, but I suggested waiting until Friday afternoon so they would have to worry all weekend without legal advice. Jake convinced us to stick with Thursday, saying it would save costs and still keep them busy with financial statements all weekend, likely increasing their legal fees. Initially, we wanted to serve them in person to watch their reactions, but Jake advised against it. Instead, we decided to serve them at work, in front of their colleagues. After leaving Jake's office, we went to the bank to transfer money into new accounts in our names only, ensuring we had statements for all accounts. We paid off and canceled credit cards, opening new ones in our names only. I checked my email and found 3 more videos of Bonnie and Rich. I thanked the sender and asked how they got the videos, expressing concern about them going public. Publicly, I secretly wished they would be released, but we had to be cautious to avoid a lawsuit. An hour later, I received an email with an address. 39203 Victoria Street, apartment 2011. I visited the address and convinced the woman at the counter to give me information by implying that the tenant was involved in criminal activities. She gave me the details. The apartment was rented by a V insurance company where Rich and Bonnie worked, with Rich's signature on the contract. I wondered how the company would react if they found out they were paying for Rich's affair. Bonnie called me at 12:30, furious about the divorce papers. I calmly told her I knew she had found someone else and was setting her free. We had rehearsed our responses. Bonnie angrily denied the affair, accusing me of believing rumors and threatening to take everything in the divorce, including custody of the kids, child support, and half of our assets. She suggested that Rich could move in with her and I could live with Susan, imagining what they were doing in my house. Go ahead, I said. Get yourself a lawyer. I barely kept my voice steady, struggling with the regret of my marriage falling apart and anger at her stubborn denial. I hoped Susan hadn't revealed too much to Rich. By the way, the girls are packing your things, Susan told Bonnie. The boys will pack Rich's. Everything will be in front of the house for you to pick up this afternoon. We got a restraining order and changed the locks this morning. You'll have to find another place to stay until the court decides. Bonnie started yelling, so I hung up. 10 minutes later, Susan texted me. Backyard, bring your cooler, make sure it's full. That fool Rich, she began, sipping her beer. He tried to blame it on some secretary's gossip. I told him Bonnie did the same. He denied everything, said we shouldn't believe it. I told him to get his stuff. Really? Yes, I told him to call first because I had a loaded weapon. Jake will be here soon with 2 sheriff's deputies to keep things from getting out of hand. I realized having deputies present was smart. Rich might provoke me, and I could end up in jail for assault. I was already in a controlled panic mode, like during emergencies. Susan continued, I'm glad you talked to the kids earlier. I couldn't have done it without breaking down. We gathered the kids and I told them what was happening. Surprisingly, they seemed to expect it and started packing Bonnie and Rich's stuff. Susan said the kids took it surprisingly well. Maybe they were in shock or didn't realize how it would affect them. My phone beeped with an email. I wonder if it's from Pissed Off 999, I said. Check it, Susan insisted. She showed me how to open it and we listened to an audio file. Can you believe Robert and Susan served us? Bonnie said. They must have found out somehow. I can't believe this. Just last night Robert was so affectionate. Relax, Rich replied. They don't know anything. Someone must have gossiped about us having lunch or driving together. We need to deny everything. If they go through with this divorce, we'll make them pay. I know a lawyer who will help us. Just don't admit anything. Act like everything you say is being recorded. After listening, Susan and I were silent. Okay, let them think we don't know anything, I said. Rich mentioned they've been planning something for a long time. We need to ensure we're protected if they do something illegal. Susan nodded, tears in her eyes. We have to hold firm, I said. I know, Susan said quietly. Jake said I'm in a better position. Courts favor women, but I can't accept Bonnie getting custody of Jason and Deary and living in your house until Deer turns 18. Even with the prenup, it's terrible if she lives rent-free while you pay child support. I felt the same but hugged Susan as she cried. I assured her we would come out victorious, though I wasn't sure how. Divorce is about minimizing losses. The children were silent as Susan and I entered the house. Deirdre and Cindy were packing Bonnie's clothes into suitcases and bags, now using plastic garbage bags. I asked them to take pictures of the luggage, planning to apply its value to Bonnie's share of the assets. Next door, the boys were almost done. Rich had fewer clothes, and the boys were stuffing them into bags rather than folding them. I smiled as Rob stuffed a $2,000 suit into a bag. They had my back. Bonnie texted me, and I called Jake, who showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies. Jake told me to relax and enjoy. Bonnie and Rich arrived with another familiar face, Budrow Landry, a bully from elementary school. "Hey, Robert," Budrow smirked. "I hear you're having trouble with your wife and son-in-law." "No big deal. If I had a weapon, I would have shot him." Budrow was huge and fighting him wasn't an option. "Hey, Budrow," I said, "we're just trying to work it out." "You don't seriously think my boy Rich is with your wife, do you?" Budrow asked, grinning. "That's the story," I said. Jake moved closer. "I can't deal with it," Bonnie accused me. "You're taking all the money from our bank account." "Yes, and I have statements showing the original amounts. You'll get what you're owed." She didn't know her credit card would no longer work. Susan and I didn't accompany Rich and Bonnie into the house. Deirdre and Cindy followed Bonnie and a deputy, ensuring nothing funny happened. Jason and Rob followed Rich. "Where's my jewelry?" Bonnie asked. This was a major point of contention over the years. I bought her high-quality jewelry worth at least $25,000, most of it locked in my safe. I took pictures of Bonnie's ring and necklace for insurance purposes. I wanted proof of ownership. Budrow started to argue but stopped when I explained I took pictures to prevent the jewelry from going missing. Jake stepped in, suggesting a new appraisal of all assets after consulting with Budrow. Bonnie calmly removed her jewelry and handed it to me. "Where am I supposed to go?" Bonnie asked. I nearly suggested her love nest on Victoria Street but held back. I shrugged, realizing my emotions had shifted days ago. I loved this woman, but now I felt detached, like she was a stranger. Bonnie and Rich finally left with Budrow following. I wondered if they were heading to the apartment. Jake smiled. "I hope so. We have someone following them. If we reveal the apartment now, it will help our negotiations." Instead, they went to the Holiday Inn near their office. Cheerfully, I helped them move their things inside. I needed more flash drives for backups of the audio and video files. Susan and the girls were making dinner when my phone beeped with another email. Susan followed me to the computer. "Okay, guys," Bud's voice said. "Someone's probably following Robert. Stay at a motel and get a room with 2 beds. Make sure both beds look used. The investigator can bribe the maid to check. We'll say you're sharing a room to save money." It was embarrassing when my card was declined. Rich said, "Good thing I took extra cash." "What's next?" "I'll call the credit card company to open a new account." "Robert's thought about jewelry," Budrow continued. "He likely has a list. Protect any hidden assets. Legally, they're community property, but what Robert and Susan don't know about, they can't claim. Don't hide too much, you might get caught. If you have a secret bank account, make sure it holds only a small amount. Offshore accounts are better. You don't want to be caught lying under oath." "Now what?" Bonnie asked. "They can find our Baton Rouge accounts." "Screw that," Rich exclaimed. "We'll fly to the Cayman Islands and open an account there. Make the room look used. Wet the tissues, ruffle the towels, wet the shower, and use some shampoo. I'll call the office and say we're off tomorrow." The audio file ended. "Do they have secret bank accounts?" Susan sighed. "Where did the money come from?" "I see the bank statements. He couldn't have hidden much." I felt bad too. Bonnie and I got $50 weekly for travel cash, and we both reviewed the credit card statements monthly. I told the apartment woman Rich was into pills and cortisone as a bluff, but now I wondered if he could be hiding something more. We decided to leave it for tonight, joining the kids for dinner. There wasn't much we could do about hidden bank accounts anyway. The next morning, I drove to Jake's office, having arranged a jewelry appraisal and an estimate for my firearms from a local dealer. Susan went to work briefly, and we met at Jake's office where I played the audio files from the previous day. "I'd like to know who's sending these," Jake said. "How they bugged Bonnie and Rich in the hotel is beyond me. A private investigator couldn't have done it that fast. We might need a judge's order to find their bank account balances, which could mean hiring an investigator. Susan and I shook our heads when asked if we had noticed missing money. If you want this divorce quickly, like you said, we'll move fast. Next week, we'll meet with Bonnie, Rich, and their lawyer to list assets, then go before a judge. Louisiana's Napoleonic laws make divorce easier, especially with proven infidelity. Counseling won't help. Once the judge rules, you'll wait 6 months, and it's over. Jake added, Budrow called demanding you release an extra 30% of the money you withdrew. I reminded him the prenup states. The cheater only gets 20% of assets. He demanded proof of infidelity, which we'll present in court. It was amusing to see him flounder. I'd love to get an audio tape of him advising hiding money offshore into the courtroom. I had to work that weekend. The head nurse, Sharon, couldn't cover my shifts. What if I start coughing and need a COVID test? I asked. Idiot, Sharon said affectionately. Yes, I could fill in. You have vacation and sick days saved up. Take an emergency vacation if needed. I can't believe Bonnie did this to you. How about I work this weekend and start my vacation on Monday? I suggested. Really? Thank you. I owe you one, Sharon said. I'll start your sick leave and then vacation. Take as much as you need and keep me posted. Working was a welcome relief. Weekends were busy, but ICU staff had to stay alert. I was surprised to see my father-in-law, Dr. Pran, waiting for me at the nurse's station. Hello, Dr. Pran. What brings you to the ICU? I greeted him, knowing the staff would be curious. Cut the crap and let's talk, he hissed in the head nurse's office. He asked, What's this about you kicking Bonnie out? She called her mother, sobbing. John, I found out Bonnie is having an affair, I said bluntly. She's cheating on me with my sister's husband. I'm dealing with a family crisis. It was a rumor started by gossipers at the office, said John. They commute together and often have lunch together. She told us the rumors about an affair with her boss were just that, rumors. I decided to be open with him despite our history. I haven't told anyone except my lawyer and my sister. I haven't even told Bonnie and Rich everything I know, let alone the kids, I said, holding back my emotions. I have proof, video and audio. And audio files. This isn't just a rumor. Dr. Pran looked shocked. What are you going to do? He asked softly, already knowing the answer. What can I do? I replied. I'm trying to protect the kids, but I can't just ignore this. John, what would you do if Bonnie had proof I was cheating? I'd want your head on a platter. I'd help her bury you, he said honestly, with tears in his eyes. What about Jason and Deirdre? How are they handling it? He asked. They're talking more with their cousins, and they're staying in touch with their mother, but I'm not sure if they realize the magnitude of what's happening. Cousins then with Susan or me. They seem to be holding up, but they're angry with Bonnie. I told them they need to talk to her, but I don't know if they have. I'm not getting involved in this. I thought you were overreacting to gossip, John said softly. My first priority is to protect Jason and De'Ara. I nodded. And I'll help Bonnie with her physical needs. I don't excuse her behavior, but if you have irrefutable proof, I accept it. Stay in touch. You're an honorable man. He walked out, shoulders slumped. I felt more sorry for him than for Bonnie. Wow, Susan said when I got home. So he knows his daughter isn't so virtuous. We need to tell Mom and Dad soon. How about tomorrow night after your shift? We don't want them to be mad at us for keeping them in the dark. I agreed. The meeting wasn't pleasant. My father only asked if I had proof, and I assured him I did. Like John, he was more concerned about the kids than us, which I understood. In our culture, children came first, and adults dealt with the consequences of their actions. Children were protected, but informed to learn. I received no additional information from my mysterious benefactor, which was fine. I had 4 explicit videotapes showing Bonnie and Rich, along with audio recordings proving their long-term affair. I didn't need more proof. Bonnie not only cheated, but also financially defrauded the family. The mystery of how she saved enough to fly to the Cayman Islands infuriated me. She was a thief and a fraud. Jake began investigating their accounts using social security numbers, ensuring we could subpoena statements if the money was missing. Some questions were answered the following Wednesday when we met to list our total assets. A court-appointed financial arbitrator reviewed the paperwork. I provided my annual salary and Bonnie's pay stub. Bonnie made $5,000 a month, and my salary varied with overtime, but we earned similar amounts annually. Jake said this would allow for minimal alimony, even without the prenup and infidelity proof. On Monday, the auditor requested income tax returns for the past few years. I found them in our desk while Susan had to get copies from her accountant. She was upset that Rich hadn't filed them with other documents. She knew Rich earned about $80,000 compared to her $50,000 and was pleased when Jake said she'd likely get a sizable maintenance payment. Budrow entered the conference room with a sullen Rich and Bonnie. Bonnie glared at me, her anger surprising me. I expected an apology, but she remained silent, likely on Bud's advice. Rich struggled to maintain a neutral expression. The court officer introduced himself and his assistant, who took notes and kept an electronic record. Let's get started. Your attorneys have forms for you to sign, confirming that your statements today are true and may be admitted into evidence. Our goal is to compile a list of all assets and income for the judge to review. We won't discuss prenuptial agreements today. Regarding car valuation, we'll use the standard Blue Book. If the car your child drives is registered in your name, we can consider it separate from community property if both parties agree. We'll get to the money later. Let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Fontano, listing automobiles, firearms, the boat, and household goods. It took only a few minutes. Even Bonnie's jewelry wasn't a problem. I had it appraised, and its value exceeded that of my truck and firearms combined. Budrow insisted the solar system be considered separately and prepared a document stating its value and depreciation. Jake reviewed it, made a few notes, and nodded. The 401k accounts were listed. I asked why, thinking they should be excluded. No, they count since you've been married over 10 years, but in your case, the values are similar, so it's not a big issue, replied Jake. We then reviewed the checking and savings accounts. Jake entered the statements showing I had taken 80% of the funds and did the same for Susan and Rich. It's straightforward, said the auditor. Mr. Jacobs, there's a big discrepancy between Mrs. Fontano's salary estimate and her tax returns for the last 2 years. Rich tensed up. I've estimated each of you earned $600,000, I explained. I multiplied her monthly salary by 12. Yes, but for the last 2 years, Mrs. Fontano reported an income of $140,000 annually. My incredulous, what the hell made the assistant frown? Didn't you look at your tax return? He asked. I shook my head and explained that Bonnie and Rich had a new accountant handle our taxes electronically. I just looked at the small refund we got. Bonnie turned purple. Her salary includes $80,000 in bonuses each year, Mr. Jacobs said. I looked at Budrow. And Mr. Jenkins got $110,000 in bonuses each year, Jacobs continued. Susan asked how much extra that was. Net, about $80,000 a year, totaling about $160,000, he replied. So where's the money, Bonnie? I demanded. Is that why you went to the Cayman Islands last Friday to hide it? Bonnie angrily asked, How did you find out? Are you following me? She then composed herself. No, I didn't need to, I said. You did it yourself. Both you and Susan insisted the kids install phone locator apps. Jason and Diara used it to track you when you didn't answer them on Friday. They saw you reappear near the coast, suggesting you were in the Cayman Islands. Bonnie and Rich looked astonished. They checked your office on Monday and saw you weren't home but in Baton Rouge, likely transferring money into new accounts, I added. Jake spoke up. Budrow, we can get statements to prove those account balances. It's illegal to hide money offshore to avoid distributing. Joint assets. Your clients flew to the Caymans right after hiring you. Hiding assets like this is a felony. Bonnie began to cry, and even Rich looked scared. Budrow's face turned pale and then red. I didn't do anything like that, he declared, looking at the recorder and Jacobs' assistant typing away. Susan asked Jake, Can we get them to return the money? Jake nodded. Yes, we'd get our share in the end, even if we have to confiscate their paychecks. 80% of those accounts will become yours once infidelity is proven in court, but there's no money left, exclaimed Bonnie. It disappeared when we tried to transfer it. Rich tried to silence her, but she continued. I think you stole it, she accused me. I looked at her incredulously. I didn't know for sure about the money until recently. I suspected it, but I had no idea of the amounts. What are you claiming now? Did you spend it all or lose it? Both are nonsense. She explained that they tried to transfer the money electronically at the bank in Grand Cayman, but the transfer was denied. They then went to Baton Rouge to investigate. The online statement showed the transfer but no routing number or account details. Provide me with the bank information for the Baton Rouge account, and I will investigate, said Mr. Jacobs. I can get the results faster and enter them into the court documents. Rich and Bonnie left the room looking dejected. Susan wondered where the money went, and I shrugged, sharing her thoughts. Our case was expedited, likely because Bonnie and Rich had begged Budrow to speed things up. They stayed at the Holiday Inn for a week before moving to the apartment on Victoria Street. It amused me to think about them in their love nest, likely struggling with cash flow and Budrow's fees. All 5 children insisted on attending the hearing, and I agreed since they were affected by the divorce. Jake explained what to expect. Judge Goody conducted his hearing semi-formally, sitting at the table with us. Jake, Susan, and I sat to Budrow's left, with Rich and Bonnie across from us. The kids sat in the gallery. Following Jake's lead, we stood as the judge entered. He waved for us to sit. I handle family cases in a semi-formal setting, he explained. Sit and speak when I address you. Raise your hand if you want to speak. Be on your best behavior and respectful. If you piss me off, I'll throw you out. The kids managed to hold back their laughter at his last statement. Well, I've reviewed both cases. Normally we treat these as separate matters, but the evidence and parties involved are the same here. A sibling is accused of infidelity in Louisiana. While infidelity alone isn't grounds for divorce, there are prenuptial agreements that affect property distribution in such cases. Therefore, I'll need irrefutable evidence of infidelity first. There were discrepancies regarding monetary assets with allegations of hiding funds. My investigation shows Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins have bank accounts in Baton Rouge with balances of $120,000 and $160,000, respectively. The entire balance was transferred from these accounts the Monday before the divorce petition was filed. The correct passwords and security questions were used, indicating the transfers were made by Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins or someone they authorized. Further investigation revealed the money was split evenly among 5 accounts belonging to their children: Jason and Diara Fontano and Robert, Dave, and Cynthia Jenkins. These transfers are legal under the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. The accounts were set up years ago, likely for college or income in the event of a parent's passing. I was stunned. Why was Bonnie making such a fuss if she had given the money to her children? The judge continued. The parents showed responsibility, if not remorse, by giving the money to their children. Such deposits are non-refundable unless fraud is proven. Does anyone have proof of fraud? I was thrilled. While I would have liked my 80% knowing the money was divided among the children was satisfying. Rich and Bonnie looked shocked, suspecting we had outsmarted them. When Judge Goody asked if we had proof of fraud, we all shook our heads and said no, Your Honor. They seemed terrified of possible charges for hiding money overseas. None of them appeared willing to rebut the judge's remarks. The next matter is the establishment of custody of the minor children, the judge said. My daughter Diara raised her hand. Yes, Your Honor. I read that children 15 and older can choose which parent to live with. In some states, yes. In Louisiana, I consider the children's opinions after speaking to them privately, Judge Goody replied. Diara stood and stated, I don't need to talk privately. My mother cheated on my father and our entire family. I want to live with my dad. Jason stood up and agreed. Robert, Dave, and Cindy also stood, stating they wanted to live with their mother for the same reason. My heart raced under the table as I squeezed Susan's hand. I will consider your wishes, Judge Goody said with a half smile. But it hasn't yet been established that there was, as you put it, treason. Diara raised her hand again, and the judge turned to her. I also read that a 16-year-old can petition the court for emancipation, and 17-year-olds can leave home without a petition. Yes, the judge replied. The 17-year-old rule is an old law for young men wanting to enlist in the military without parental consent. For a 16-year-old to petition for emancipation, they must be able to support themselves. Is that clear? Diara nodded. I have a college fund with another $56,000 added to it. With the additional funds my parents and grandparents provided, Cindy, my brother Dave, and I could comfortably live independently for an extended period. Jason and Rob joined in, stating that if they combined their finances, the 5 of us could thrive on our own. I glanced at the judge, who stifled a chuckle. Let me venture a guess, he said. If I reject your request, you'll all petition for emancipation or leave home without permission? The 5 of us nodded. Sit down, he ordered. I'll consider your proposal. Regarding the allegations of infidelity in this case, he continued, which impact the prenuptial agreement and property distribution. I require evidence. Jake stood up. Your Honor, I present these photographs of Richard Jenkins and Bonnie Fontano together. Budrow objected. Photos can be easily altered. I have a photo of myself shaking hands with the president and another of us playing golf created by my son. It's a joke. Defense counsel has not identified the source of this evidence, Judge Goody interjected. Jake nodded towards Susan and me. Your Honor, the evidence came from an anonymous source. I received several video and audio files and captured these screenshots from one of the videos. I have the full video on a DVD and thumb drive. I glanced at Rich and Bonnie, who appeared shocked and agitated, shaking their heads in disbelief. Judge Goody observed their reactions. Do I need to play the file Mr. Fontano provided, or do all parties agree that infidelity has occurred? He asked. Budrow requested to view the footage, but when Bonnie and Rich pleaded with the judge not to show it, he withdrew his request. We concur with the plaintiff's claims, he said. In that case, I will issue my verdict, Judge Goody declared. Since all parties acknowledge infidelity, the marriage contracts will be honored accordingly. Susan and I were awarded 80% of the community property. Judge Goody suggested we work out the actual distribution with our attorneys to avoid further court involvement. As custodial parents, Robert Fontano was granted full custody of Jason and Diara Fontano, and Susan Jenkins was granted custody of Cynthia, Robert, and David Jenkins. The non-custodial parents retained full visitation rights. The divorce would be finalized in 6 months. Due to the increased incomes, Bonnie was ordered to pay me $1,000 per month, and Rich was ordered to pay Susan $2,000 per month for the next 3 years. Each dependent child would receive $500 per month until they turned 18. Jake maintained that the payments were inadequate and suggested an appeal, but I declined and Susan agreed. After the hearing adjourned, Jake offered to schedule a meeting to discuss property distribution. I instructed the children to change into home clothes and wait for a family meeting. Susan and I approached my father, who was waiting in the courtroom. When did you realize? I asked. Susan seemed puzzled. It dawned on me when Diara and Cindy mentioned the video, I explained to Susan. Pissed Off 999 is a persona the kids created. Susan's mouth dropped open in surprise. No, my father corrected me. I figured it out a few days ago while reviewing an old credit card bill. Jason and Rob asked for a credit card 2 months ago to plan something special for your anniversary, promising to reimburse me for $500. However, the statement showed a purchase from an electronics company. Initially, I overlooked it, but when I called the company, they revealed that the kids bought cell phone bugs. They spent $500 on spy devices? I asked. Yes, my father replied. Apparently, they were quite expensive. I didn't know where they got the video cameras, but I followed them home to investigate further. In the living room, all 5 children were waiting for us. They fell silent as we entered. Go to the kitchen and sit down, I instructed. Susan handed beers to my father and me, while Jason and Rob grinned and extended their hands. You may be old enough to be spies, but not old enough to drink, I said. They shrugged, understanding that I wasn't angry. Okay, who wants to start? Let's go back to the beginning, Diara suggested. Cindy and I visited my mom's office, but she and Uncle Rich were absent. This was around the time COVID-19 lockdown restrictions were implemented. We figured we could get some money from them for a movie. The receptionist informed us that they had left long ago. It was well past lunchtime, so we decided to track them. We have a locator feature on our phones that my mom insisted we install, Diara continued. It showed them at an unfamiliar address, which we checked out. It was an apartment building. When we arrived, we saw Uncle Rich's car and waited. They emerged later holding hands and smiling. That got us thinking. So we tracked their movements over the next few days. Rob picked up the story. For 3 consecutive days, they returned to the same location and stayed for about an hour and a half each time. Sometimes they went there late at night after work, but always before going home. We told the boys about it. Boys, we searched the internet and found bugs that could be inserted into cell phones, Rob explained. After downloading an app, it functions like a continuous phone call in the background without disrupting regular use. Regular phone calls. It does drain the battery a bit faster, but it transmits all the sounds around the phone, allowing you to eavesdrop. We talked Pop into letting us use his credit card to buy them. Sorry we lied a bit, pal. Installing the bugs and the app on their phones was easy. We took turns checking them and eavesdropping on conversations. We recorded anything interesting to share later. So that's clear with the audio recordings, but how did you get the video and find out which apartment they used? I asked. We looked at their keys, Diarra explained. They both had a key marked 2011. That's not their office number, so Jason copied his mom's key. We went into the apartment a couple of times and looked around. We decided we needed cameras, Diarra explained. We bought a few and a small transmitter, added Dave. That was pretty cool. The boy was excited about the technology. He didn't notice he was describing the end of several marriages and the breakup of two families, at the very least. Susan and I got some answers. The cameras were motion sensitive, so they didn't burn too many batteries. We hid the receiver under the couch. The receiver got information from the cameras and transmitted it to our receiver. We recorded it. So you took a video of Bonnie and Rich doing it? I said carefully. You also recorded audio files and sent some to me. These were my kids, my nephews, and nieces. I couldn't ruin my relationship with them, but there was another issue. Money. Dad, when Cindy and I first looked at that apartment, I realized our mom was gone, Diarra stated. Well, not gone, but not back to where our family used to be. They had clothes stashed away, and Mom had some outfits I recognized. She had a makeup kit, towels, and washcloths too. We knew what they were doing. They'd work out, clean up, and then come home to you and Aunt Sue like nothing had happened. We were all furious. They weren't just cheating on you and Aunt Sue, they were cheating us. Now about the money, the secret bank accounts were a side issue, Cindy said. When we looked around the apartment, we found some bank account papers. There were instructions on how to access it online. It took a while to find the actual accounts. We even spent time in Dad and Aunt Bonnie's offices, peeking in on them a couple of times. The receptionist let us in to wait for them. She giggled. We looked through a bunch of folders and finally found one in the bottom drawer of Dad's desk with some applications. Then we looked in Aunt Bonnie's office and found more papers. Aunt Bonnie had a small notebook in her purse with passwords and stuff in it. It didn't say secret bank account, but we could tell the password was unusual, much more so than the one she uses for her cell phone. And it worked. It took a while, but eventually we realized it was the right password. They were using the same password for both accounts. Jason took control of the situation. We already knew they were up to something shady when we discovered their hidden bank accounts. We got really angry. We wondered if they were dealing pills or embezzling money. Dave was the one who came up with the idea of putting money in our accounts. Dave blushed. Actually, I said we can't let Dad and Aunt Bonnie get rich and leave us hanging. We read about dividing assets in a divorce, and we didn't like the idea of them keeping half the money either. We had accounts set up by Powwow, and I thought maybe we should take all the money. I thought the cops might catch us, but since we were minors and it was our parents' money, we wouldn't get in serious trouble. We thought it might work, so we did it. If we'd known about the 80-20 share, we probably wouldn't have taken it, Diarra said regretfully. It actually worked out better that way. And then you guys started sending me video and audio files, I said, looking around the table. I was at least a little relieved to see an expression of restraint rather than outright pride. That was the hardest part, Jason said quietly. We were really, really mad at Mom and Uncle Rich for what they were doing to all of us. We didn't want to hurt you and Aunt Sue, but we couldn't do anything, so we sent you that first video. We kept trying to get you to visit Mom and Dad. We knew you were upset. If you pulled a weapon out of the safe, we would have told you everything we knew. You'd tell Aunt Sue. We kind of moved on. We already moved the money that Mom hid. I think we stole it. Well, I know we stole it, but we figured they cheated us, so it was only fair. I hope you and Aunt Sue weren't too upset. I looked at Susan, who had a look of amazement on her face from the start. I hope you kids never get mad at me and Sue, I said with a smile. But if you ever nail me like you did your mother and Rich, I'll punch you. The loss of life, even if it's with my walker in a nursing home. They all chuckled at my threat. You'll never have to worry about that, Daddy, said Diarra. You'll never let the family down. We Sinjuns stick together. One thing I don't understand, my dad said. You bought cell phone bugs with my credit card. They were awfully expensive. Where did you get the money for the video cameras? Yeah. They cost about $500 for each camera because they shot full video with sound and had built-in motion and sound detectors, replied Jason. We got 5 of them, plus another $500 each for a hidden transmitter that sent a signal to a receiver we hooked up to Deer's computer. That's a total of $3,500 plus shipping. But we can get half of that money back if we return it, undamaged. We already pulled all the cameras and the transmitter. We probably lost the cell phone bugs, though. As for the credit card, we used Dad's Visa card. I didn't have a Visa card, I said. So we do now. I applied for it and forged your signature, said Jason. At least he was honest enough not to look guilty. It has a $10,000 limit. We bring in the mail every day, so hiding it was easy, added Diara. Cindy and I set up an email account, Pissed Off 999. Rob came up with the name. He said what Mom and Uncle Rich did made him mad. The kids smiled and nodded, seeing that Susan, Dad, and I were really impressed. So the bugs in the cell phones are still active? I asked. Dave nodded. Yes, they work as long as the cell phone batteries are charged. Thanks to that and the phone location app, we know where they are and what they are doing at all times, said Dave. He was thrilled when he realized they weren't in trouble. If one of them is talking on their cell phone, we can hear it. It's voice activated, so it's a lot of car sounds and business talk. We took turns going through the files to pick out anything important. I demanded access to the audio recordings. As a result, Susan and I had advanced knowledge of Bonnie and Rich's demands at the property division meeting. Bonnie was so eager to get her jewelry that she gave me most of the cash and all of the housewares. We granted some of their requests without much argument, but we made them grovel during the process. Susan shocked everyone except me when she suggested they walk across town with signs on their heads saying, "We cheated on our spouses." The alternative was to appeal the amount of alimony and child support. I thought Bud's eyes would pop out of his head at that threat. We heard Boudreaux tell them they got off easy on the child support payments and warned them that Susan and I would likely appeal the amounts. Susan eventually recanted, forcing them both to apologize on their knees. I don't know exactly how it happened, and I'm willing to swear on a stack of Bibles that I had nothing to do with it. But somehow, 2 months after our hearing, the insurance company that Bonnie and Rich worked for found out that he had rented an apartment for a love nest with company funds. Although everyone in the office had gotten premiums for the past 2 years, for some reason, Bonnie had them much higher than usual each year. Rich managed to get big bonuses too. No one ever figured out why. When all this got out, he and Bonnie were fired. No big deal. The company didn't want any publicity. None of the videos ever made it to the internet. Susan and I couldn't have cared less, and we joked over beers that it would have been fun to make them stars. But the kids didn't want to publicly embarrass themselves. We understood their point of view. Bonnie and Rich now live in New Orleans, working for a small shipping company. Since leaving town, they hardly ever visit the kids and they rarely even call. Last I heard, they are having a very difficult time paying child support and alimony. I wish them well. Well, maybe not.